In such moments, I am invariably reminded of my time in the desert. This is a reasonable recollection, given that I am currently observing my target through the scope. However, my intention is not to engage in terrorist activities or criminal acts. In this instance, I am the perpetrator, while my target is a balding, perspiring, and slightly overweight banker who is currently engaging in sexual intercourse with a subordinate from the bank. Why am I observing this scene? I am here because I have been contracted to end his life. I am unaware of who ordered this man's murder. The payment was made in cryptocurrency, and the entire operation was conducted through the dark net. I will never meet the person who placed the order, and I have no ties to either the target or his lover. By the time law enforcement receives the alarm, I will no longer be there. I am very careful not to leave any traces that could point to me. I continue to observe through the scope for a further period of time. While I am not a voyeur, I require an opportunity to shoot for a number of reasons. I am unable to shoot while they are in situ, as is commonly advised. However, in my experience, when a man has reached the point of ejaculation, he either rolls over on the bed or stands up. This is a signal for me to act. I adjusted my scope slightly, focusing on the area of the room that I could see through the window. There was no one present apart from the couple engaged in sexual intercourse. I looked. She is a valuable asset. The contract stipulates that she will not be harmed, at least not physically. However, it is unclear how observing her lover's head explode as he goes to the bathroom to take a leak will affect her psychological state. I briefly scanned my surroundings. It is crucial to maintain a balance between focusing on a goal and ensuring one's own safety. I lack an observer and cover, so I must ensure my position is secure. Secure, it is accurate to conclude that I am situated on the roof of a building situated across the street from the hotel where the individual in question resides. Upon returning to the scope, I observe that the process is nearing completion. I then adjust my position and verify that the conditions have not changed. At this juncture, the individual in question arches his back and reaches climax, shuddering once, twice, and then 3 times before becoming still. He then disengages from the situation as anticipated, heading to the bathroom. At this point, I discharge my weapon. I departed before the victim could vocalize her distress, and by the time law enforcement arrived on the scene, I had already traversed a considerable distance. I stored my equipment in one of several storage units I had procured in various locations throughout the city, each under a different name and prepaid in cash. During my journey, I once again contemplated my circumstances and the path that led me to become a perpetrator of such a heinous crime. How did it come to pass that I am now a killer, with a singular focus on eliminating those who have transgressed by engaging in infidelity? The act of shooting is a relatively simple one. I have always been adept at using an AR-15 rifle, a skill I developed at an early age while hunting on a farm. I developed an affinity for guns, especially rifles, which enabled me to make shots that would kill everyone else. It was almost instinctive when I enlisted in the Marines, and then in sniper school, we were taught a plethora of trajectories, wind resistance, ballistics, and other scientific principles. I learned all of this, but I did not require it. It is evident that I am capable of making a shot that many snipers are unable to accomplish, even with the aid of sophisticated technology and complex calculations. My proficiency in this area is undoubtedly a natural and instinctive ability. Undoubtedly, I would have achieved remarkable success in the Marine Corps had circumstances not changed my life forever. This pivotal event ultimately led me to specialize in the field of cheating spouses. As you may have surmised, the individual in question is Gabrielle, a French national of petite stature and dark complexion. The woman in question is a petite, dark-haired individual whom we encountered in a bar in the city while on vacation. She is lively and attractive, and her body evokes a multitude of unclean thoughts. She spent the entire evening with us, and my best friend, Bobby, and I took turns dancing with her. By the end of the evening, it was evident that there was a mutual attraction between her and Bobby. With a bitter smile, I did the only thing a best friend could do, I wished him well. Subsequently, I returned to BAS alone. Thereafter, on each subsequent visit to the city, they were inseparable. I would either commence the evening as a third wheel, attempting to find my own company, or, on occasion, she would bring a friend to keep me company while she and Bobby engaged in mutual enjoyment. I was astonished when, after 3 months of dating, Bobby approached me to present the ring he had purchased for her. "Bobby," I said, "that is a rock. Are you certain you are prepared for this?" He chuckled, as though he were an old sage. I will not allow her to leave the look she gave when Bobby got down on one knee at the bar that night. I was struck by the fact that I expected her to be excited and happy, but a look of calculation flashed across her face before she showed the expected emotions. I did not speak to Bobby because I was reluctant to disrupt the moment, yet I was intrigued. I had organized the bachelor party as the best man, and despite my own words, it was a remarkable event. All the necessary elements were present, and the majority of attendees were friends. Additionally, alcohol was consumed in large quantities. That evening, I had to assist Bobby in returning to his bunk, and he recalled very little about the evening. Of course, there were also dancers. It was necessary for me to protect Bobby's virtue and ensure that he was not subjected to any untoward incidents during the party. I had previously discussed with Gabrielle the boundaries she wished to set. Had she expressed a desire for there to be no dancers, I would have ensured that there were none present. It was my intention to ensure that Bobby did not become divorced before we were married. The wedding ceremony itself was relatively small, attended by her parents, a few of her friends, and a few of our fellow platoon members. I was, as I have already stated, the best man. The best man stated that, months later, the unit was again deployed to the desert for 3 months of service. This patrol will be remembered by the author for the rest of his life. The unit was instructed to search a village where, according to the available intelligence, the rebels could be located. The spotter and the author had already scouted and found a place where the author could provide surveillance for the unit. However, the situation was not ideal, as the author still could not see some areas. However, this was the optimal option. Bobby had been visibly uneasy all day, eager to proceed, and abrupt with others, including me. When I inquired about his demeanor, he simply smiled and stated that he was eager to depart. Bobby never returned from that patrol. I was unable to observe what transpired since his position was out of sight from my vantage point. However, his team reported that when they encountered the enemy, Bobby stood up, shouted something, and rushed towards them, firing his M16. Bobby stood up and shouted something like, "Go you bastards," before rushing towards them and firing his M16 with great enthusiasm. He did not even run 3 meters before his demise. I was tasked with collecting his things to send to the USA when I found the letter. Dear Bobby, I know this is the coward's way, but I need to tell you that I dated someone else and we fell. I am writing to inform you that I am leaving you so that he and I can be together. I want you to know that I really loved you, but the time spent apart showed that I am not truly in love with you. You deserve more, so it will be better if we break up and you can find someone who will love you as much as you deserve. Please do not think too badly of me. John says you still have a month left on tour, so by the time you get back, I'll be upon moving out of our house. I will not be demanding anything from you during the divorce proceedings. I will be glad to consider you a friend if you find the strength in your heart to forgive me. Best wishes. The coffin, and Gabrielle approached him, tears streaming down her face. She placed her hand on the coffin, and I stated, "Do not you dare. You have betrayed him." She stepped back, stunned, and I then observed the officer accompanying her, Colonel John Edwards. I was perplexed by his embrace of her shoulders. "How dare you? How dare I?" I demanded. This deceitful woman had sent a "Dear John" letter to an active-duty soldier just before a patrol. I was incredulous when I learned that she had sent a letter to the Marine Colonel Edwards, who was accompanying her. I had not been aware of this. I informed her that she should wait, and I suggested that we could discuss the matter further. I then asked, rhetorically, whether she had met the wife of one of her subordinates. He then struck me in the throat, causing me to collapse to the ground. He then proceeded to kick me in the groin, which caused me to fall to the ground a second time. He then proceeded to kick me 4 more times. I struck him in the face on numerous occasions while he was on the ground before the police arrived. My greatest satisfaction was that we were both sentenced to be court-martialed for inappropriate behavior and me for assaulting a superior in rank. I spent a year in military prison for assault, after which I was dishonorably discharged and he was simply removed from the service, deprived of his pension. It took me another year to locate her. She had relocated to Canada and was residing with a French-Canadian businessman. I was unaware of Colonel Edwards' whereabouts. I considered simply shooting her from a distance. It would be simple, no security, no surveillance, a simple woman in public, like catching fish in a barrel. However, she would never know what killed her and why. I wanted it to be more personal. I wanted her to understand who I was. I proceeded to kill her and explain why she had made everything so simple for me in the end. It was reported that she was at a dance with her friends. It was also reported that she was still cheating because the man who was currently running his tongue down her throat was not her French-Canadian businessman. I observed from the bar as he whispered something in her ear. She nodded, and they proceeded to exit the premises. I exited the front door and walked around the bar. I surmised that they were going to leave. I was gratified to observe that they were proceeding in the direction of the SUV, which was parked in the lot. I stationed myself by my vehicle to ascertain whether they intended to leave the scene, but when the men opened the rear door of the SUV, I discerned that their destination was the vehicle. I surveyed the vicinity to ascertain whether there were any witnesses or surveillance personnel in the area. I proceeded to approach the SUV until I observed Gabrielle, or more precisely, Gabrielle's posterior protruding from the rear door, accompanied by the men behind her. I was disinclined to kill the man, as I had no legal claim against him. I swiftly strangled him, causing him to fall unconscious on the floor. It took Gabrielle a few seconds to realize that the shaking had ceased. She climbed out of the car and turned to face me, her eyes widening as she recognized me. She opened her mouth to speak, but I shot her twice, putting 2 bullets in her chest, and she was thrown back into the car. I disappeared before the gunshot reached the bar and was back across the I crossed the border into the United States less than 4 hours later, driven by a desire for revenge against Bobby. This experience gave me an idea. There are undoubtedly numerous individuals currently experiencing the pain of infidelity. Some may seek reconciliation, while others may opt for divorce. However, there will also be those who are seeking a more definitive solution to the problem of a cheating spouse. I possess the necessary skills to make this happen, and thus I became a hitman, specifically targeting those who have strayed outside the confines of their marriage. The task is relatively straightforward. The victims are ordinary people who are unaware that they are being targeted and lack personal protection. I had been practicing my craft for approximately 4 years and was earning a substantial income when I met Juliana. Juliana is the finance manager at the car dealership I visited when I wanted to buy a new car. She is intelligent, engaging, and attractive. Additionally, she is approximately 5 feet 10 inches tall in heels with long, jet black hair. Furthermore, she possessed an exceptionally attractive posterior. We immediately established a strong rapport, and within half an hour, she consented to a date. I will not provide a detailed account of the subsequent courtship, but it is sufficient to say that a year and a half later, Juliana and I were married in a large wedding ceremony with over 200 attendees, comprising her friends and family, my parents, and a few of my former sailing companions who remained in contact with me. From Juliana's perspective, I was a prosperous financial manager, responsible for managing finances and spending the majority of my working hours on this task. I utilize a computer at my residence, yet I am frequently required to travel across the country. This cover is optimal for my professional endeavors. My relationship with Juliana was positive. She provided support for my financial management, even when I was obliged to travel for business. Upon my return, she would engage in intimate activities with me in a spontaneous and unrestrained manner. During my periods of absence, we engaged in sexual intercourse at least 4 to 5 times per week, and on occasion, even more frequently. She did not engage in sexual activities with other women, although she had numerous friends. We would always accompany each other when we went out. She accepted invitations to dance from other men, but always ensured that their behavior, like hers, met her husband's requirements. I never doubted that she loved me just as I loved her. The contracts were transmitted via the dark web, and accepting them made me paranoid. We never met in person, all interactions were conducted online. Proof of infidelity was required, and the perpetrators were unaware of when or where the contract would be executed. The money was transferred to a virtual account with the ban was lifted and the money returned to the client only after the contract was completed. In the event that I was unable to fulfill the contract for any reason, I had the option of returning the money to the client. However, this has not been necessary thus far, as I had no connections to any of the victims. Law enforcement never approached me, and since I used cryptocurrency, even if it could be proven that the person who entered into the contract paid the lump sum, its whereabouts were completely unknown. In terms of the ratio of men to women I have killed, it is significant to note that I have killed far more men than women. The ratio of men to women who cheat is approximately 10 to 1. When a woman is unfaithful to her partner, the man in question typically desires her demise. Conversely, when a man is unfaithful to his partner, the woman in question often wishes for his demise. There are, of course, exceptions to this rule. However, I have no moral qualms about my actions. I am compensated handsomely for my services, and I believe that those who cheat deserve to face the consequences of their actions. After 3 years of marriage, Juliana and I had our first child, followed by our second just 18 months later. They grew up in a stable and loving family. Juliana, who had been feeling a sense of emptiness in the absence of her children, returned to work at the car dealership. I continued working from home for the majority of the day, with occasional trips. I decided that I would retire, and that 1 or 2 more contracts would complete the pension fund I had been building. I was, frankly, tired of the game. I consulted the job board I had previously used to search for work and saw that there were 2 available contracts. One is in a neighboring state, and the other is on the other side of the country. I elected to pursue a local contract as a means of exiting the business. To that end, I accessed the relevant job portal and initiated the process of securing a contract. The target was identified as Peter Miller, a salesperson for group insurance, which operates in 3 states, including ours. Miller's duties entail extensive travel within his assigned region. He is married to Janine, and they have 3 young children, Paul, Mary, and Shaban. I have obtained private investigator reports indicating that it is alleged that he has been unfaithful to his wife with 4 different women. He is currently on the road, and his route has brought him within 50 miles of where I live. He is staying at a hotel for a week. There is no information that he has a mistress, but it is assumed that he has one and that they will date during his stay. The contract provides for surveillance of his hotel room. If he appears with a woman who is not his wife, then he is to be monitored constantly. Attached to the contract were photographs of the man himself, his wife, and the dossier also includes photographs of 3 children. This raises the question of why photographs of children are included in the dossier, particularly given the potential sensitivity of the information. However, whoever compiled the dossier did a commendable job. In addition to the hotel where the subject was staying, the dossier also included the room number. I conducted further research by Googling the hotel and found that the room the subject had booked was on the 5th floor, on the east side. A quick glance at Google Earth showed that although the hotel was not just down the block, there was construction going on just down the block. If I can get to a high enough floor of this unfinished building, I will have an unobstructed view of the east side of the hotel. The building I will occupy affords an unobstructed view of the east side of the hotel. The buildings directly opposite the hotel are only 3 stories high. I will be leaving on Monday morning and returning on Thursday. Perhaps Friday, Juliana inquired. I have already finished with them, she said without complaint. I simply inquired whether this might be the last, depending on how things go. There might be another. Another such instance would be similarly disappointing. She nodded, then grinned, indicating that the prospect of spending the entire weekend together was a promising one. Following an enjoyable Friday night, we ventured out on Saturday, engaged in a few mundane activities, and then proceeded to dine at our preferred restaurant. We spent the majority of Saturday evening and Sunday in bed. On Monday morning, I departed the house and drove to the airport by car, after parking. I then proceeded on foot for approximately a mile to a nearby warehouse and climbed into an inconspicuous vehicle was utilized for this purpose. It was a gray Toyota sedan that was immediately forgettable. She registered on a fake ID that was strong enough to pass police checks but would not withstand much scrutiny. I was in position on the 7th floor of a construction site, aiming at his window, when the target entered the room. He fumbled for a few minutes and then picked up the phone, obviously making a call. After a short conversation, he left the room. It was a little after 12, at 1800 hours, I did not pursue him, as I was aware that he would return. I therefore settled down to wait. The construction site was closed, so I was not afraid of being discovered. When he returned to his room, it was already after 1800 hours. At 1800 hours, he proceeded to the bathroom to take a shower. I observed him as he returned to the bedroom. His actions were unremarkable. The water in the shower was likely cold, as there was minimal visible moisture between his legs and his body was thin and uninspiring. I often pondered what attracted women to such men and concluded that he must possess excellent conversational skills, as his physical characteristics were not particularly noteworthy. After another 30 minutes, he got dressed and left. I ate and sat down to await his return. I was confident that it was my expectation that he would return, accompanied by a female companion. I would take a photograph to prove his infidelity and then proceed to end his life. The contract does not stipulate whether the woman should be killed or spared, so I will not kill her, although I have no objection to killing cheaters. At the time, I was unaware that the woman was unfaithful to her partner. It is possible that she was merely a lonely individual who was taken in by this individual's deceit. I have no further information and she will remain alive. It was already past midnight when the lights in the room were illuminated once more, and I looked through the scope once more. I saw my target enter the room with a tall, dark-haired woman. The woman, with her dark hair, approached the man and pinned him against the door. She fell to her knees in front of him. Due to my position on the couple's floor, I could not see what was happening. The woman was positioned with her back to me, and I could see only her torso and below due to my vantage point. However, I was not concerned. I anticipated that they would move further into the room. The couple remained locked together as they proceeded to remove the remnants of their attire. Upon reaching the bed, the woman was clad in her undergarments, while the man was unclothed. He initiated a kiss, tracing his lips across her body from this vantage point. I could discern only the upper portions of both figures, but then the woman inclined her head backward, prompting me to shift my gaze to her face. In that instant, I was compelled to exert a considerable degree of self-control. I was compelled to refrain from pulling the trigger. Instead, I activated the camera that was linked to my scope and took a digital photograph. Over the subsequent 3 hours, I captured images and videos of the couple engaged in sexual intercourse in the bedroom. They even conducted this act by the window with the blinds open and the lights on, allowing them to be observed from the street. However, they appeared unconcerned. Having reached their limit, they retired to bed for a final session of sexual intercourse before retiring for the night. As the couple slept, the lights were extinguished. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding and my thoughts racing. I accessed the photograph I had taken first through the scope and viewed it on my phone. The woman arched her back, her eyes wide open. I zoomed in on her face and into her eyes, which were the eyes of my wife, Juliana. My thoughts were racing. I was unable to complete the murder at that moment. One of the safest things about I was not involved with the victims or their partners. If I were to kill one or both of them, the first person the police would want to talk to would be me. My alibi would not stand up to that level of scrutiny. Furthermore, I am not in a position to decide what to do with Juliana. I am so angry that I could have killed her without thinking, but I knew that the anger would pass. I need to think not only about myself but also about my children. I must consider the implications of my actions and their potential consequences. I will have to live with my decision for the rest of my life. Another option is to return the contract, but this may result in someone else acquiring it and carrying out the task themselves. I also considered the possibility that this was a setup. Could someone have arranged this scenario to expose my wife's infidelity with this individual, with the intention of undermining my position? I do not believe this was the work of law enforcement, as they would not engage in such tactics. I must not allow any of them to become aware of my potential vulnerability, as they may be able to exploit it. There is a possibility that someone else is involved, perhaps someone connected to one of my previous contracts who wishes to exact revenge. I must fulfill this contract, but I must ensure that it appears to be a random or natural occurrence. I must avoid any contact from the police, as they may pose a risk to my safety. I will address the matter of Juliana at a later point in time. I gathered together all my belongings and took them to the store's storage room. I will not use them for this particular job while I am in the store. I proceeded to the storage facility, where I procured a few additional electronic devices. Upon returning to the hotel, I discovered that both vehicles had been fitted with GPS tracking devices. The following morning, after the two individuals had departed, Juliana returned to my residence, while he proceeded to undertake the tasks he had been assigned. I then entered the hotel and, using the electronic key card, accessed his room. I conducted a search of the room, finding nothing out of the ordinary in his luggage. However, I did discover several blood pressure medications and some Viagra. I installed several hidden cameras. I have 4 days to complete the contract, since I informed Juliana that I would not return until Thursday or Friday. I did not require frequent communication with her, although I was aware that she would contact me today. Additionally, I reserved a hotel room using my fictitious identification. It would be more convenient to remain in the hotel legally. I surveyed the premises and discovered that surveillance cameras were only installed at the entrance and in the elevators. There were no cameras in other locations. During the daytime, I observed their movements while making my preparations. Juliana was at work, then went to the gym, then returned home after a while. His tracker showed that he was heading towards my house. I swore to myself that if she allowed this individual to enter my house, I would kill them both on principle and not care about the consequences. Fortunately, he did not come within 5 blocks of my house just after 6 o'clock. At 6 p.m., Juliana contacted me via telephone. She expressed her affectionate greetings and stated that she had missed me the previous night. She apologized for not contacting me sooner, explaining that she had fallen asleep in front of the television and had only realized it was already late when she woke up. I responded with a sense of frustration, indicating that I had assumed she had not contacted me because of my absence. This was the first time she had not contacted me. Juliana provided false information. It is evident that there were additional instances of deceit, though I was previously unaware of them. She inquired about the status of the meeting. An unforeseen complication has emerged. An unannounced individual attended the meeting, prompting concerns and inquiries. I am confident that I will be able to finalize the agreement, though it may require additional time. However, once everything is done, I will no longer go on business trips. I informed her that she would be back on Friday, not Thursday. I could discern a hint of a smile in her voice when she replied, "Oh, you don't seem too disappointed." I replied rather curtly, "I'm not at all. I was just glad when you said that this was. If this is the final business trip, then it is worthwhile." She said, "What are you doing tonight?" "I have just returned from the gym, so I intend to lie in front of the television and go to bed early. I also need to work effectively." I joked, "If you are not in bed by 11 o'clock, you have to go home," she said, laughing. "I'll call you tomorrow evening. I miss you. Good night." I don't know if she noticed that I hung up without saying anything further. The last call was to my friend, who is a chemist and sometimes supplies me with the preferred method of killing when my usual method is ineffective. Some people want things to look more natural, which usually increases the price, but in this case, I'm willing to take a loss. By the time I got back to the hotel, after seeing my friend, I discovered that the __ was already back. Upon connecting to the camera, I heard his phone ringing. He said, "Hello," and I winced. Juliana was particularly displeased when her name was shortened in any way. If it was her and she allowed him to call her Jules, the situation would undoubtedly deteriorate further. It is curious that such seemingly inconsequential details can elicit such strong reactions. The conversation continued. "No, I came back late. Give me an hour to get ready, and I'll meet you downstairs at 7 o'clock. Indeed, I am eagerly anticipating it tonight. I will make you exclaim with delight. I will make you forget that unfortunate individual you have chosen to wed," he said with enthusiasm. "Oh, no, Juliana," he replied. "I did not intend to offend. I am aware of my actions. Please, do not be upset, dear." He then observed his phone, his expression indicating distress. He shouted angrily. I smiled, but my expression was somewhat enigmatic. It seemed as though he was experiencing a loss of passion. My phone rang. It was Juliana. "Hi baby, how are you?" I asked, somewhat surprised. "I just remembered that I didn't say I love you when we..." She trailed off. I engaged in a conversation with the individual in question, during which I sought to ascertain whether she was experiencing any emotional distress. I inquired as to her well-being, and she responded that she was fine. However, she then proceeded to indicate that she was merely longing for my company. I then observed the phone indicator on my computer indicating that the goat was engaged in a telephone conversation. I surmised that the call was being placed by him, and I postulated that the purpose of the call was to contact her. I then suggested that we engage in a brief discussion, and I proposed that it would be as if I were present in person. I then awaited her decision. She could either continue her conversation with me or resume her discussion with the individual in question, who was attempting to persuade her to engage in sexual intercourse once more. She made an erroneous decision. I am merely misguided. My mother is attempting to contact me. I merely wish to convey my affection. Good night. the words were already spoken before I could halt them. Good night, Jesus. I terminated the call. I am uncertain if she observed my actions in the room. I heard his phone ring, and he smiled as he picked it up. Good night, baby. Yes, I am sorry. I am truly sorry. I am aware that you do not appreciate this. When I express negative sentiments about him, it is merely an expression of my insecurities. I aspire to be a more adept lover and to gain a deeper understanding of how I can provide you with the same level of pleasure that you offer me. I will not pursue this course of action. Instead, I propose an alternative. I will invite you to dinner at Archie's. I will reserve a table for 7. I am aware that my actions may have appeared abrupt. I am sorry for that. I am also aware that I have expressed my love for you. I hope you accept my apology. Juliana, good night. I love you too. I was under the impression that this indicated that she had confessed her love to him. Is this simply a reflexive way to conclude the conversation, or did she genuinely possess feelings of affection for this individual? I will ascertain the truth of this matter tomorrow, shortly after I overheard him requesting room service and a meal, as well as 2 beers. I had decided that the moment had come to take the initiative. I waited for the food to be delivered to my room and for the hotel employee to leave. As soon as he sat down to eat, I knocked on his door. I stood to the side so that he would not see me through the peephole, but I do not believe he even looked. He opened the door and looked at me, his expression betraying a hint of surprise. He regarded me with a gaze that seemed to convey a sense of both surprise and unease. I introduced myself as Peter and inquired if I could enter for a brief period. His response was limited to a silent movement of his mouth, yet I proceeded to advance, prompting him to retreat. The door closed behind me. What is the purpose of your visit? He asked. I have approximately $500 in my wallet, I replied. You are free to take it, but I ask that you do not be unduly rude. I am here to have a pleasant conversation with you, I continued. You are acquainted with my employer, Janine. I believe you are aware of the circumstances surrounding this situation. My esteemed colleague will provide them to me. I have already acquired a substantial amount of information, yet there are still some gaps to be filled. Therefore, if you provide false information, I will uncover it and take appropriate action. He turned pale. I do not intend to harm you. It is evident that she will pursue and expose every woman you engage in an illicit relationship with to their respective spouses. In the event that you divulge the entirety of the information in question without reservation, I shall depart from this room without the necessity of attending to your remains. This proposition seems reasonable. I proceeded to open a bottle of beer, uncork it, and offer it to him while simultaneously uncorking a second bottle and taking a sip. I became melancholy, contemplating the nature of their activities in this establishment. I inquired, and he regarded me with a glimmer of hope. In his eyes, if I divulge the entirety of the information he has requested, he will refrain from taking my life. He inquired as to whether I would be willing to share the details he sought. I asserted that I would not shoot him and that I would depart, allowing him to resume his life. I recommended that he contact his wife after I leave and suggested that if he were to sufficiently humiliate himself, she might even take him back, if only for the sake of their children. I indicated one of the chairs and he sat down. He then inquired about the specific details he desired. I proceeded to provide him with the information he sought. He then proceeded to provide me with the names and addresses of the other 3 women. He also informed me that he was aware of a 4th woman who resided in the city. He believed her name was Juliana and that she was employed at a car dealership. He then nodded, indicating his understanding. He informed me that his wife was not particularly knowledgeable about Juliana, and suggested we begin with her. He requested that I provide him with a comprehensive account of my interactions with Juliana, including the circumstances of our initial encounter and the duration of our sexual relationship. He then proceeded to narrate his story, taking a slow and measured pace as he sipped on a bottle of beer. I had met Juliana approximately 4 months prior. My initial encounter with her occurred at a car dealership. He informed me that he had met her at a car dealership where he was employed as an insurance salesman. He described her as physically attractive with an appealing physique. He was immediately drawn to her and decided that he wanted to pursue a romantic relationship with her. Their initial meeting lasted for several hours, after which he invited her to lunch. He was surprised that she accepted his invitation so readily and even more surprised when, after dinner, she suggested that he take her to dinner that evening. She explained that her husband was away on business, so they returned to his hotel. She gave him a night he would never forget. He began to describe what she did for him, but I interrupted him. I do not require such details. Therefore, I asked, how often did you meet with Juliana? We met approximately 8 or 9 times. Each time, her husband was away. She called me, and if I could find time to come here, I came. I even canceled dates with my other girlfriends. She was far superior to any of them. He said with a grin. He became overly enthusiastic about his story. He momentarily forgot about his situation and drank the remainder of his beer. He then looked at the empty bottle and asked, "Can I have one more?" I informed him that it would be unfortunate if I had to shoot him because of a misunderstanding. It seemed as though we had become somewhat closer. He chuckled once more and proceeded to the minibar to get another beer. I shook my head in response, and he returned to his seat. I then asked, "You say that Juliana completed all the steps. Do you know if she did so knowingly? It is unclear how frequently she engaged in such behavior. However, it seems unlikely that she was his first. There was no indication of guilt. She did not allow me to criticize my husband, even though I had made a mistake and called him an unkind name. She was highly critical of me. Otherwise, she would be here. It seems unusual that she would be upset about this, given her actions." I said, thoughtfully, that she shares her life. He explained, in her understanding, that Julian is a loving wife to her. I am unsure of his name. She refuses to discuss him. This is not the Juliana who engages in leisure activities with me. She does not perceive any impropriety in this situation, as these two individuals are distinct. I am uncertain whether her husband will view it in the same manner. While she may perceive them as two distinct entities, physically, they are one person. Peter winced and placed his hand on his chest. Some incidents have occurred. I inquired about the cause, which I believe to be indigestion. I had not eaten, but consumed beer. He then began to choke, and his face turned purple. Sweat began to roll off of him. He grabbed his chest with both hands and said, "Help me. Peter, look at me," I said. He raised his head, and his eyes were frightened. He was out of breath, and I saw that he didn't have much time left. "You should have stayed." I informed Juliana of my decision to remove myself from the situation. My wife's eyes widened for a moment and then rolled back as he lost consciousness. It would take him another 10 or 15 minutes to die, and I utilized the time to ensure that there were no indications in the room that anyone other than him was present. I activated the television, but did so quietly, and moved that the food that housekeeping had brought in was discovered in front of the body. It was determined that he had suffered a fatal heart attack while eating dinner and watching TV. He was already on blood pressure medication, which contributed to the likelihood of a heart attack. A full autopsy would likely have revealed evidence of heart disease. Given the circumstances, it was particularly concerning that he was also taking Viagra, which is contraindicated in this case. I conducted a second examination to confirm his demise. Once I had ascertained that the hallway was secure, I affixed a "Do Not Disturb" sign to the door and returned to my room. The following day, when Juliana contacted me, it was already 5, the time was 30 p.m. "How was your day?" she inquired in a cheerful tone. "It was productive," I replied. "I have resolved one of the outstanding issues, and I am confident that I can resolve the remaining one. Listen, I have an idea. Given that this is my final business trip, why don't we fly to Mexico for the weekend? I can pick you up at the airport, and we can celebrate the weekend and perhaps even extend the vacation. I believe you are entitled to some time off, but even if you are not, simply stating that you are going would indicate that you no longer require this position." Juliana also expressed amusement. "It seems that is a splendid notion. I shall converse with Barry tomorrow and ascertain his opinion. I shall contact you tomorrow evening and we can reserve the tickets." "Magnificent." I inquired as to what she was doing that evening. Everything remained as it had been. She was obliged to conclude her work and then she would view the series. She observed the time, being aware that she had arranged to dine at 7 p.m. and that it would take her at least 40 minutes to reach her destination. "Listen, my dinner is prepared. I shall converse with you tomorrow. She replied, I shall converse with you tomorrow. She then added, I shall enjoy my dinner and indulge myself. I replied, I shall converse with you tomorrow. She terminated the call at 8 p.m. At 30, I heard a knock on Peter's door from the moment I placed the "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door. The maids had not entered the room, and I surmised that Juliana had come to the restaurant to wait for Ed and inquire about his tardiness. The knock was repeated 20 minutes later, and I heard the lock squeak and the door open. A hotel employee entered, followed by Juliana. Upon seeing Peter lying with his face buried in the frozen remains of last night's dinner, the employee rushed to him. She observed the scene from her position at the doorway. The hotel employee performed a pulse check, which indicated that the man was deceased. His body was unresponsive and motionless, which was indicative of death. Juliana departed the room without uttering a word. The employee became aware of her departure only after she had already entered the elevator and departed the hotel. Law enforcement and medical personnel were promptly dispatched to the scene. After searching the room for an extended period, they located the man's medications. Medical experts determined that he had suffered from a fatal illness. A fatal heart attack was the cause of death, given the man's state of health and the circumstances of his demise. Police spoke with a hotel employee who informed them that they had entered the room at the request of a woman who had come to visit the man. Together, they found him. The man was unaware of the woman's identity, but upon seeing her at the beginning of the week, she came to visit him. However, the men had been to the hotel before and had several female visitors. The employee considered the possibility that they might be escorts but did not mention this to anyone because the men gave the tips were beneficial and not discernible to others after the individuals in question had departed. I retrieved my surveillance equipment, packed it, and checked out of the hotel in the morning. In the parking lot, I removed the GPS tracker from Peter's car, which was still parked there on Saturday morning. I collected Juliana from the airport and we proceeded to the villa I had rented. She expressed great enthusiasm as she observed a private pool with sun loungers and stated, I'll go change clothes. Can we chat for a few minutes? In my initial conversation with JWS, she turned her head and looked at me. She stated that she was displeased with me using that particular term of endearment. I inquired as to why she seemed so offended when Peter used that same term. She turned pale but then decided to be bold. I then asked her who Peter was and if she knew him. She replied that he was Peter, the insurance agent, and that she had been having sexual relations with him for the past 4 months. She also mentioned that she had spent Monday night with him when she said she was so tired that she fell asleep and didn't call me. I told her that I didn't know who she was talking to or what she had heard, but she began. I placed a 205 photograph on the table between us. It was the same photo I took at the beginning, through the scope of her lying on her back, her eyes wide. She sank into a chair. When I inquired about the photograph, she shrugged. I asked how long ago it was taken. She looked at me evenly and stated that it was about 4 months ago. I take it he wasn't the first. Do you truly wish to pursue this line of inquiry? I asked. Do you want to uncover the truth about your unfaithful wife? I suggested. You might consider seeking a more original approach to labeling this endeavor. I would like to be impressed, but before you begin, I have a question. Why did I do this? She asked. I began to answer, but then I stopped myself and informed her that she should continue. We have been married for a long time, haven't we? She asked. I nodded. Can you tell me how many times a week on average we have sex? She asked. I thought for a moment and replied, well, with age, it began to decline. At first, we had sex every day, sometimes twice. After reaching adulthood, we began having sexual intercourse at least once every 2 days, and sometimes more often. The sexual intercourse was and still is mutually satisfying, and you are still the best lover I have ever had. However, you began going on business trips that sometimes lasted for a month. I am accustomed to having sexual intercourse almost every day, but you expected me to go without it for weeks. One night, I decided that since you were not present and I could not have sexual intercourse, I would go to the gym to relieve the tension. Ultimately, I went home with one of the men I met at the gym. I found a way to satisfy my sexual needs. Your actions prompted a profound awakening within me. The following day, I experienced feelings of guilt and trepidation, fearing that you would discover my actions and suffer emotional distress, potentially leading to a dissolution of our marriage upon your return from your trip. In an effort to atone for my transgressions and make amends for what you were not aware of, I engaged in sexual intercourse with you on a near-daily basis for a week. Even at that early stage, I was aware that the next time you left, the situation would remain unchanged. Consequently, after a period of adjustment, I decided to accept the new normal but felt the need to establish certain precautions. I therefore created a set of rules, the first of which was that I would not engage in this behavior when you were at home. This was not because I thought you would discover my actions, but because I felt it was important to maintain a certain level of respect within the relationship. I did not believe that you would discover my infidelity, but rather, I was motivated by the fact that you have always been my primary and most intimate partner. I did not feel the need to seek other romantic or sexual relationships if you were present. Additionally, I never invited anyone to our residence. I would never have the audacity to disrespect you in such a manner when another man was present. For the same reason, I have never permitted any of my other romantic partners to treat you in a disrespectful manner. Some men seem to derive pleasure from denigrating the husband USW whose wives they have sexual relations with. If any of them began to speak negatively about you, I immediately ceased the interaction. She refused to engage in further sexual intercourse with him and even removed some of them from our bed for this reason. Thirdly, I underwent regular screening for sexually transmitted diseases. I was motivated to refrain from transmitting any such diseases to you, and I am aware that this may be perceived as a reason that extends beyond the mere avoidance of legal consequences. In fact, I was motivated by a genuine desire to avoid placing you in a potentially risky situation. Furthermore, I underwent 2 tests that indicated an inability to become pregnant. I utilized an intrauterine device, IUD, and a birth control implant at the time we were preparing to have children. I subsequently ceased using these contraceptives. I possess copies of the DNA tests conducted on our children that you may review if you require evidence. I was aware that you might discover this information and question the nature of our relationship with the children. This is why I chose to engage in this behavior throughout our entire relationship. During the period in which we were together, you stimulated me to such an extent that I was unable to function without it. A period of 1 or 2 days is to be expected, but if it persists for longer, I require some form of relief. This was the extent of my involvement. I never entertained any feelings for any of them. The only man I have ever loved and been in love with is you. I was gratified to learn that this would be your final excursion. I was delighted to discover that I no longer needed to seek out inferior substitutes. I would no longer have to compromise because I would always have the best option at my disposal. My days of having to settle for second best would be over. It seems somewhat ironic that what may have been the last encounter with another man proved to be the one that led to your discovery. In your previous account, you stated that the photographs were taken on Monday. However, you also asserted that you could not go more than 2 days without sexual intercourse. This raises the question of whether you truly believe that you did not engage in sexual activity on other nights. What about Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday? She responded with a brief, mirthful laugh. He contacted me on Tuesday to inform me that he had returned to the hotel, but he began to speak disparagingly about you. Consequently, I informed him that our relationship was over and that I would not consider dating him again. Some time later, he called back to express his regret. I forgave him but stated that I was no longer interested in pursuing a relationship with him that night. We agreed to meet on Wednesday. He suggested that he invite me to dinner as an apology. When I called on Tuesday, I asked if his mother was going to be there. She had the decency to look guilty. He replied that she was not going to be there. He said that he hated lying to me and that he did not want to lie to me anymore. Do it, I said, noting a sudden widening of her eyes. Wait, you called me Jules on that call. I recall finding that somewhat peculiar. Did you know already? She then inquired about the photographs, which had been sent to me on Tuesday morning. Accompanying them were transcripts of previous calls. She exhaled once more. I'm truly sorry that you had to find out this way. It is evident that this must have been a distressing experience. However, it would be remiss of me not to inquire about the events of the subsequent days. I was curious to ascertain the impact of his demise on her. She proceeded to inform me that he was scheduled to meet with me for dinner on Wednesday. In response to the question on television, I stated with a degree of irony that I had indeed watched the program and found it to be of merit. However, I did not view it on the evening in question. Instead, I was merely satisfying a physical need. It was akin to going out for lunch with a friend. I needed to eat, and my friend was not available to keep me company, so I went with my friend. I recognize that this may be challenging for you to accept. It is challenging for you to accept this perspective, but it is how I have perceived and continue to perceive what I did when I engaged in sexual intercourse with other men. I have never referred to this act as making love. I have only done this with you. You are attempting to avoid providing a direct answer. I have previously stated that I am trying to avoid telling you what I on Wednesday. She stated that she had not done so. As previously mentioned, they had arranged to meet for dinner, but he did not attend. She waited in the restaurant for 45 minutes and expressed her frustration. This was her first experience of being set up. She subsequently decided to go to his hotel. Upon arrival, he did not open the door, but she was aware of his presence. He was at the hotel because his vehicle was in the parking lot. I requested the manager's assistance, and we discovered the individual in question deceased. According to the medical examiner, the decedent was taking blood pressure medication but also had a history of using Viagra, which is contraindicated. It is probable that the decedent suffered a massive myocardial infarction. Fortunately, he did not die while entertaining guests. I noted that it would be much more inconvenient. She concurred, stating that it would have caused a commotion. His wife would have discovered the truth. I posited that she may already be aware. I suspect that it was she who sent me the photographs. Juliana nodded, indicating that I did not need to inquire about her relationship with the individual in question. I commented, and she smiled. She stated that she would not apologize for her actions, asserting that they were necessary, yet expressed regret for causing distress and for the discovery. In regard to this matter, I was counting the days until you ceased undertaking business trips, with the intention of avoiding the necessity of continuing this situation. However, I was aware that as long as you remained absent, this would persist. My sole objective was to mitigate any adverse consequences and to hope that, should you ever become aware of my feelings for you, your affection for me would be undiminished. I was attempting to ascertain whether you would have preferred to engage in a dialogue with me. I proposed that we could potentially arrive at a mutually agreeable resolution. I could have adopted a different approach, even accompanied you on business trips. However, I was aware that such a suggestion was futile. It was beyond my capacity to include her in my itinerary. Nevertheless, I was compelled to gain an understanding of the situation. I was reluctant to be perceived as your wife is a demanding individual who expects a high standard of living and then expresses discontent with the manner in which you provide it. You are deeply committed to your profession, and our shared life has been exceptionally fulfilling. I did not intentionally pursue this path, it simply evolved over time, and by then, it was no longer feasible to alter my course of action. I gazed at her for an extended period. She inquired as to the subsequent course of action. I proceeded to the kitchen and opened a bottle of wine, pouring each of us a glass and returning the bottle to the table. I handed the glass to Juliana and sat wearily in a chair, drinking half of it in one gulp. I was uncertain as to how to proceed. I must consider this matter carefully. We have been together for a considerable length of time, and I believe that you loved me as much as I loved you. While our relationship was characterized by a high level of sexual intimacy, I also experienced a significant lack of sexual fulfillment during my absence. I endured prolonged periods of abstinence, even lasting several weeks or months. I have experienced these same feelings of deprivation. I had the opportunity to have lunch with other women while I was away, but I never did it. I remained true to our vows. I am perplexed by your absorption in your need to the extent that you are willing to betray everything we have together or the promises of our vows for the sake of sex. Are you going to claim sex addiction? Do we need you to see a psychologist? She opened her mouth, but I raised my hand. Please, I gave you permission to speak, but at least do me the courtesy of listening to me for a while. I leaned over and filled her glass, then filled mine. I have so many questions. How can you? It is perplexing to differentiate between the concepts of sex and love so readily. Traditionally, it was believed that men were more inclined to compartmentalize these two aspects, whereas women were thought to require love in order to experience optimal sexual pleasure. If this is indeed the case, and there was no underlying love present, then it can be assumed that the pursuit of sexual gratification was prioritized over the development of a genuine relationship. How do you think I feel about this? Furthermore, you have stated that you are unable to abstain from sexual intercourse for more than a few days consecutively. What are the long-term implications of this? It is a well-documented phenomenon that men's sexual desire tends to diminish with age, while some women experience an increase in their libido as they grow older. Is this what I should anticipate? Will I return home to find a younger partner? The boy in our bed is insufficient for you. How can I look at myself in the mirror every morning with any semblance of respect, knowing that our entire married life, you have been engaging in extramarital relationships with other men? There have been dozens, if not hundreds, of them over the years. In addition, you claim to have been getting tested regularly, but what is the point? You could become infected and pass on the infection even before the test results come back. You could have given me anything, even HIV. You could have killed us both. Where would our children be then? Her face twitched, and she was absent. She rubbed her left arm in a seemingly absent-minded manner and smiled at me. Peter was a rather disagreeable individual, in my opinion. I believe he eventually developed feelings for you. He informed me that he would cancel meetings with other lovers when you called and said that you were free. She inquired as to when I had spoken with Peter. I had spoken with him on the evening of his death. I was somewhat displeased to see you engaged in sexual intercourse with that individual. She resolved to ensure that it did not occur again. Her complexion was flushed, and I could discern distress brewing in her chest. What did you do with him? She inquired about the same matter I had just addressed to you. I emitted a low growl and stated that I had killed this traitor. I encouraged her to extend my greetings to me upon her arrival at hell. I also recommended that she subscribe to our channel to prevent her second-in-command from engaging in infidelity and to ensure that she would not miss out on the next story, which would be far more impactful than this one. If you are under the age of 18, I advise you not to listen to the next story.